Gaza health authorities say the Palestinian death toll from the ongoing Israel attacks on the Gaza Strip has risen to over 34,900. Over the past 24 hours, the Israeli army has reportedly killed 55 Palestinians and wounded 200 others. The Israeli military stated that it conducted targeted raids on the Rafah crossing yesterday. But Palestinian media reports that several other areas in the city have also been subjected to intense airstrikes and shelling. Meanwhile, the United States is warning that it will stop supplying Israel with weapons if it launches a major ground operation in Rafah. Israel has launched several airstrikes on Gaza City since Wednesday. Rafah has been a key entry point for aid and the only exit for people able to flee the conflict. At the same time, ceasefire talks are continuing in Cairo. Delegations from Israel and Hamas have resumed negotiations through mediators.
So we're going to continue to do what's necessary to ensure that Israel has the means to defend itself. But that said, we are currently reviewing some near-term security assistance shipments in the context of unfolding events in Rafah.
We are outraged by the complicity of the church. Let it be clear, friends. Silence is complicity. And empty calls for peace without a ceasefire and end to occupation, and the shallow words of empathy without direct action, all under the banner of complicity. So here is my message. Gaza today has become the moral compass of the world. Gaza was hell before October 7th, and the world was silent. Should we be surprised that there's silence now? If you are not appalled by what is happening in Gaza, if you are not shaken to your core, there is something wrong with your humanity. And if we as Christians are not outraged by the genocide, by the weaponization of the Bible to justify it, there is something wrong with our Christian witness, and we are compromising the credibility of our gospel message.
That was Pastor Munther Isaac. He is a pastor of the Christmas Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. Last December, he delivered that sermon in which he criticized the silence of the church on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He's here in South Africa, joins me now for a discussion on that conflict. Good afternoon, Reverend. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, you know, we have to take sides. Those are some of the words that you've uttered in the last while as you watched churches, across the world, their behavior, their attitude towards this particular conflict. And one couldn't help, go back. I mean, for those of us who lived under apartheid, those words do indeed strike a chord, because we did see how sections of the church were in fact complicit.
Yes, Buyu, thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to be in the beautiful country of South Africa. And you're absolutely right. I think here in South Africa, you understand too well why I said these words in December and why I still say these words now. That neutrality in the face of a genocide that has been normalized now under the watch of the world. And if our response is neutrality, then we are definitely complicit. And if our response is simply to call for peace, when there is not just a genocide, but a system of apartheid. And again, here in South Africa, it's good to be in a place where we are understood. For imagine if someone would come at the height of the apartheid regime and simply claim, we're neutral in this, we call for peace between the two sides. I'm sure people would have been outraged by such an attitude. This is what's happening right now in Palestine. And in fact, this is what has been happening for years. Empty call for peace, and not recognizing the reality in Palestine for what it is, a system of domination and apartheid, as attested by numerous human rights organizations and legal analysts. Yet the world continued to relate to this as a conflict and sadly continue to give immunity to Israel as it continues its assault on Gaza.
Would you say, though, that because of, people like you and, of course, the entire movement around the world, things have, yes, perhaps not to the extent that they should, but the tide is beginning to turn?
The tide is beginning to turn for sure, and we are beginning to see some change. We've always seen support in the streets, to be honest, but we're seeing more and more support and more calls for a ceasefire. But I can't help but think that it's already too late, because what has been done has been done. Gaza is destroyed. Thousands have been killed. Everything in Gaza, from schools to hospitals to clinics to universities, is destroyed. So as much as I want to be encouraged by the support around the world, and let's not underestimate the role of South Africa in all of this, to see now sit-ins and demonstrations in universities around the world, to see the continuation of demonstrations in places like London and other places, is definitely a sign of hope. And the least we could hope for at this time, after all of this catastrophe, is that we can mobilize all of this support for a long-lasting, not just ceasefire, but an end to the occupation and an end to the system of apartheid that we live under in Palestine. Gaza has endured way too much, from the siege to this war, and it's long overdue for the people of Gaza to live in security and peace.
Is it another sign of hope when we hear that the United States is warning that it will stop supplying Israel with weapons if Israel launches a major ground operation in Rafah?
I will only believe it when I see it. America is directly involved in this genocide. They have made the decision. They continue to supply Israel with the weapons. And so far, all we have heard from America, and it's already too late, but even now, their words are still words. We as Palestinians know this too well, because America has warned Israel for years, for example, to stop building settlements. Israel never stopped building settlements. They said, you cannot go into Rafah, and the assault has started on Rafah for 3 days. So, and many other things. So we will only believe it when we see it. And right now, we can only hope that there will be enough pressure from the streets around the world, from activists around the world, on their governments, to put pressure on Israel to stop the war, and also to stop sending these weapons to Israel. And imagine that all of this genocide, and not only Israel isn't paying for their crimes, they're not paying the money for it. Someone else is covering the cost for all of this. So as long as we're only talking about empty words, the United States is definitely complicit in this.
Speaking of the United States complicity, I want to quote something you said in Cape Town when you were delivering a sermon. Today it's Palestine, tomorrow it's somewhere else, because it's the same mentality, it's the same ideology of segregation and supremacy. And the reason, this particular line struck a chord again for someone who lived under apartheid is because we know only too well how the United States, even Britain for that matter, behaved, during the years of apartheid, when the broad mass liberation movement had all these initiatives trying to mobilize the world to focus on apartheid at the time. Your Ronald Reagans, your Margaret Thatchers behaved pretty much the way that the United States is behaving at the moment.
Absolutely. In terms of also the control of narrative, who's who, controlling who is attacking who, and so on, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, the civilized versus the uncivilized. All of that narrative has been used against Palestinians. Palestinians, whenever they, we just heard American officials saying we will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself. when will ever hear about Palestinians' right to defend themselves? And of course, when Palestinians engage in self-defense, it's called terrorism, because this is the kind of Western domination of control of the media. It's what I call the colonial narrative. And throughout, this war, I'm analyzing and observing, and I found myself even before coming here, studying the South African context and reading what our friends here from church leaders who were involved in the anti-apartheid movement were saying and writing. I read the Cairo, South Africa document again, and I was shocked. They could have been talking about what is happening today in Palestine, about the weaponization of the Bible, about the ideology of supremacy, of separation of classes within God's economy, which is the antithesis of what the Bible says. So it's the same ideology that we're facing. And I've been here for almost 4 or 5 days in South Africa, and I've been telling our South African friends, there's so much that connects us. And now I understand why Nelson Mandela said, the freedom of South Africa is not complete until Palestine is free, because we are facing the same ideology. We're facing the same matrix, if you wish. And as such, we're here because we understand, not just that South Africans understand our pain, understand our plight, but they have both the moral credibility and integrity and also responsibility to lead the world, to say for sure no more apartheid in our world.
Of course, I mean, there is the South Africa initiative at the ICJ. Some countries deciding not to do business with Israel. What other hitherto unexplored initiatives do you think can still be pursued?
Well, we need to mobilize grassroots movements around the world to respond ethically and to put pressure on decision makers and policy makers and on economical factors, trade unions and so on, when it comes to relating to Israel as a normal state. Because, as long as Israel is not held accountable, it will continue to do what it's doing. So I think, again, to connect it with the South African struggle, there was a global movement to counter apartheid. And I think we need to create more and more of these grassroots, interfaith, civil society, university students, movements that say no to racism and no to coloniality and no to apartheid. At the time when there is a genocide happening under the watch of the world, statements are not enough. Words of condemnation are not enough. We need to call things by their name, and we need to definitely take action to make sure this does not continue.
Pastor Isaac, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me again.
He's a pastor of the Christmas Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, and he's currently visiting South Africa. Coming up next.